Alison here. Welcome back to Words and Pictures for a few minutes of fun. Continuing to think about creating white flowers now, and thinking about white on white. So if you've got a white background and you want a white flower to really pop, there are a couple of ways to go about it, and we'll have a look at that today. Probably with some cosmos, maybe a couple of summer poppies. We might save the rose for another day, for another technique, but maybe we'll do a rose. It's that time of year. So for this one, you can see these are the ones we did with some stencil flipping in a previous episode, so I'll link to that. These are done over a background, so we'll have a look at how to do that if you've already got a busy background going on. That will be coming up, but for today let's have a look at this white on white work. I will clear the decks and come back ready to play. One of the main things I want to put in your head about this is the amount of work a viewer's eye will do. So if you look closely at this cosmos, you'll notice there's hardly any actual white space left on these petals, but our eye still reads it as a white flower. Of course, it's possible to add some outlining and some background after painting, but the other important thing is not to just go for a plain white stamping and leave it at that. Adding a little bit of shading and depth will do worlds for making your flower work and pop and really affect the viewer's eye. So here are a couple of those Cosmos stamps. So this is EAB 51, now known as AB 51, now that I'm a PaperArtsy designer, a signature designer. Rustle as I get those out. So I'm going to stamp these in Archival. Obviously that's step one to them appearing beautifully on the page, but you don't have to stamp in a dark colour. So lots of these are stamped in, I think that's probably olive Archival, but you can see you could also go for a paler version that's stamped in maybe Pebble Beach. And there's even one here where I've stamped in distress ink and allowed that ink to run into what I'm painting. So all kinds of ways to do this. But I think for today, I am going to stick to stamping in Archival. We could do it in a very pale colour. I haven't really planned in advance. Let's go with Pebble Beach and let that be a nice sort of vintage, gentle colour. It's kind of I guess it's the, if you think in distress ink terms, it's the pumice stone of the Archival world. So I'm just going to pop a couple of these down here, like so. So that's very gentle stamping. I haven't quite hit the middle of that beautifully because I wasn't pressing in the proper place. So what I'm going to do is aim to maybe just press down in that middle bit to get a bit more definition. It's okay. It's fine as a stamping. And we could even put one in the foreground here. This nice big one. It's just so I can show you with a couple of different mediums. So you could absolutely do this with your watercolour paints, with your distress inks. You can use mediums that make you happy. You could even paint this with acrylic paints, though I would probably work with quite watery washes, and we'll be thinking about acrylic paints another day. So just going to put one down there in the foreground. Yeah, so we've got a little garden of cosmos flowers there. They're out in the garden at the moment, and yes, doing well. So let's just have a look at this. I'm going to zoom in a second so that you can see the painting process happen. That's a white flower stamped against a white background. Obviously, the first thing I'm going to want to do is get some greens in there, and that will immediately change our relationship with the flower. Let's take a look. I have got my watercolour paints on the desk. Almost certainly some sap green, green gold, and deep sap green will be in the mix here. But you could equally well use distress inks and create a little palette on the side here. So all I do is just smoosh a little bit of ink onto here. That's peeled paint. This is Mowed Lawn. I quite often work with a water brush when I'm using those distress inks, just because it gives me liquid immediately that I can alter the depth of pigmentation of the ink I'm working with. A little bit more water will give me a paler colour. So the first thing I'm going to do is just add that little bit of greenery that just helps the eye understand that there's something other than plain white going on here. There we go, simple as that. I might pick up a little bit of sap green from the watercolours with that. Distress inks are basically a watercolour pigment. They are translucent, they are water reactive, so it's kind of the same sort of thing, and you can use them as watercolours, no problem. Just going to add a little bit of this feathery foliage. Cosmos have the most beautiful, delicate foliage tracery, like so. So we're already starting to give the eye more to hang on to. Obviously, you've also got the centres of Cosmos. Very often, certainly the centre of the Purity Whites that I grow. That's the name of the type. I've also got some double Cosmos this year, and they're really, really exciting. They almost look like carnations, but prettier. So I've just cleaned off those greens from the mat because I don't want to get them everywhere. And let's just start with a little bit of yellowishness in the middle of these Cosmos. So that's a little bit of nickel azo yellow, just starting to shape that. I'm also going to continue trying to fool the eye a little bit by not filling in the whole of that. What I might do is give a little bit more depth right around the bottom, so adding a little bit of Aussie gold, just creating shading within that. And you can see I'm sort of dabbing the brush a little bit to get a little bit of variation of texture, and then cleaning the brush off onto kitchen towel, just heading into the rest of that flower with mostly water. So we're creating that sense of depth and variation of colour. One of the things I love doing at this point is also putting just a touch of green in here, because I feel like that it's connected through to the place behind where the green bud opens up from. So maybe there's just a tracery of green left in there. Now here's the part where we start adding colour to our white petals. So that's already effective, and if that's enough for you, by all means stop there. But I really like adding some shading to really help the eye understand what's happening here. Good colours for this. A blue-grey is a wonderful thing, so weathered wood is great. I don't necessarily want it full strength, so as well as the water brush, I'm going to start with a good spritz of water on there. And just on that, I'm just going to think about where are the petals most shaded. Probably in the centres, probably where they're maybe underneath another petal. Here, where it's facing sideways, that's very dark in there probably. Also under here, where it gets a little bit shadier because there are petals hanging down, and also maybe behind here. So on that, already quite a lot of colour on those petals, but my eye still understands I'm talking about something white. What I did when I designed these Cosmos is I was really on a run with twisty, furly things. So there's lots of twists and turns in these petals. So creating shadow to just allow the eye to help the eye understand those twists and turns is a really lovely way to just create more shaping in these petals here. And that's a good strong shadow under there. In here I might just keep it a little bit gentler, just going in for those creases. And then this one is sort of sitting underneath that petal, so creating a little bit of shadow there, bit more depth. So all watercolour mediums, including distress inks, will dry a little paler than you've put them on. So I'm already going in with a second layer just in the places where I want most depth. In there, and then let's go with this one. So this one I'm going to stay a bit looser. I'm not going to think too hard about what's going on, just going to add that sense of shading and movement in here. Now what can also be quite nice at this point is if you let some of this yellow just leak into a couple of these petals. So as it's going over the weathered wood, which is a blue-grey, it's even going to take on a hint of green. But it just, again, nature very rarely works in one block of colour, one shade. You get all kinds of colours happening and moving. And the last little colour I might add, there might be some more purple, might be some more green to come, but you heard what it was. It's going to be purple. So something like shaded lilac in the Distress ink is great. Something like that might give you a nice little shadowy colour. But what I've also put there is a bit of Cobalt Blue Violet from the Watercolours. Again, I'm going to keep this quite watery and just allow myself a couple of places where those purples are intensifying the shadow, or just adding another little bit of variation in colour and shadow, increasing that sense of movement within the petals. That one's too stripy, let's take it out. If at any point you feel like it's gone too far, pull it back. But again, so as I say, there's very little white left on these petals, but my brain is still reading it as a white flower. Our viewers' eyes are there to help us, really. They want to interpret, they want to help us out. As I said, I am going in with a bit more green just to see what I'm getting. And you can see that even on white background with no extra background added, that gives me a really present flower. It's no longer just an outline on a page. It's got a lot more presence within the... I'm tempted, yeah, you can see I'm just giving a little bit more shading to some of these raggedy edges as well. I love painting the Cosmos stamp. It's got so much that you can just bring to life about it. So those are those. The other option, as I mentioned, is to put some colour around the outside of your flower after you've stamped and painted it. So let's go with the new roses. So these are the summer roses, the rose edition. There you go, that's the new signature designer AB 05959. So the numbers of these have stayed the same. So this is still 51. It's just you knock off the E and it now says 051. I guess we're getting ready for when I get into the hundreds. We're at 59 at the moment. So there's a little way to go. I can't imagine having 100 stamp sets. Good. Where's my stamp block gone? Always on the move, the stamp blocks. There it is. I don't need that huge one. There we go. So let's stamp this in. Well, let's go for the similar thing. Maybe the same Pebble Beach. Let's be fair about what we're doing. So the good inking, in it goes. You'll notice I've left some of these shadowy colours on the mat because we're going to go in and create some shadows right away. Another colour I love for shading, particularly somehow on roses, is old paper. If you're thinking in distress terms, I love that. Let's go with that. There's my rose. And yes, we could go with this large head as well, just so we've got a little bit more variation to play with. So inking up, nice firm stamping. That's how it's coming in from the side. There we go. So I'm working with a palish colour, so I'm just trying to make sure I get a good firm stamping. I'm working on the reverse side of some of my cheapy watercolour paper. It's more textured on one side than the other, so that's worth thinking about. If you want a good stamp on the smoother side, you might get slightly less play from how the paints move. So here's the weathered wood, which again we can use, and again I'm going to think in terms of where are the shadows deepest? So we know there are shadows. I've got purple on the mat as well, which is going to be quite nice. We know there are shadows down in these deeper places where petals overlap and furl. So just heading down there and also into the centre, because they're so tightly furled at the centre, lots of roses, that you tend to get that sense of shadow down in those middle places where I've got this petal bent over. That top bit is catching the light, but underneath might be quite shadowy, so I've gone in with the purple and maybe just a little bit to intensify that there. I'm going to take a couple of shadows just down into the bottoms of those buds. There it is. And that's quite a lot of hefty shading, but at the moment I think that's pretty good. Where's my old paper? Here's my old paper. So this is sort of grey-green, and I think this can be a really lovely colour for shading, especially, as I say, on roses. White roses very often have a hint of green about them, so that using green as your shadow colour can be quite a nice way of just reflecting that. Yeah, see, I do like the green as a shadow colour. It's very subtle, but we're being subtle. That's the name of the game. White roses, white flowers, they have a subtle, ethereal quality to them. So now I'm just bringing in a bit of the weathered wood as my deeper shadow. Just continuing to build a few layers of colour, letting that happen. And I want to bring a bit of peeled paint into here. No, it's not peeled paint, beg its pardon. Old paper. Old paper into the green shadows here. Oh, and into these buds. Just creating shading in there. So there's really, really a lot of shadow in this one. And at the moment, I'm fine with that. Quite a lot of shadow in that one. Let's get some greens onto these, because as I said, having the green in place gives us a whole other perspective on a flower. So I'm just using a very light touch to get these very fine stems, a little bit of colour, and dotting between the sap green and the deep sap green at the moment. And I'm just going to add a little sweep of colour onto these leaves, keeping them very soft at the moment. Not trying to colour in as such. I just want to get some colour on the page, and then I wipe the brush and allow it to spread out. That's the deep sap green, that's a bit of green gold. Over here it was mostly sap green I had on the brush, but there's something about keeping that very loose that brings those leaves to life. It's tempting to be too precise in your colouring, and then you get a sort of overly perfect look. If you're looking for something a little bit more watercolory, as I almost always am, just, you can see I'm just sweeping the colour on without too much thought. When I'm on the stems, which are very fine, it's almost a pencil line, and if I keep the tip of the brush barely touching the paper, I'll be able to get that delicate line. If you start pressing downwards quite heavily, then the brush widens, the bristles widen out and mean that you get a much thicker line going on. That's quite nice. And also to this, it can be really lovely if you pick up some of those purples and just add those into those leaves, especially again those shady ones that might be further down, further back. Let's get some green onto these buds here, a bit more definite on that one. And the stem. There we go. So you can see that's starting to build layers of colour that allow that white rose to come into the foreground. Nice and easy. And I think white on white, that's already quite effective. But then if you do want something softer in terms of allowing that white colour to come forward, we could create a background. And let's see, what do we want? Maybe a little bit of, here's some ultramarine blue, which I'm going to put next to a little bit more shaded lilac, I think. quite like the idea of the shaded lilac in the sky. Let's make it a sort of almost dusky sort of sky. And I'm going to start away from the rose with a nice watery wash. Just down it comes. And then where I get to the rose, even working with this big brush, again for a soft look. If you go in with a small brush, it's tempting to get really precise. And what I want is a nice loose watercolory look. So I'm just going to allow that brush to move in between the roses. And if on occasion it picks up some of that green and that green goes flying, I'm fine with that. That's one of those joys of a watercolour painting. And if it doesn't go quite next to the rose, I'm also fine with that. Because again, it just gives us that sense of softness around the flower. I am going to dip some colour down into here. So I'm using a really big brush deliberately to keep this flowing and soft and not get into overthinking how fine the line needs to be. I need a little bit more of that ultramarine. So it is perfectly possible to add a background after you have your flowers in place, and that of course will allow the flowers to pop out from the background because we're no longer white on white. I might get a little bit more blue down in this corner just to echo what's going on up above. And then again, our eye as a viewer will do a lot of the work for you. So aiming for the perfection of going into every one of these gaps and getting it perfect actually overworks, offers up too much assistance. Our eyes as viewers want to do some work because then we're interacting with the painting. If you want to allow this to pop even more, then the place to go in is directly around the petals. So you can, oh, is that the right blue? That looks like a whole different colour. It's maybe because I've got some green still on here. You could come in and just add a little bit of extra shading right around the outside of the flower. And then I'm going to soften that into the sky. This is going to cause probably some textures and some blooming. But I think I must have dipped into the wrong blue there. That does look like a completely different colour. So just heading in to give an outline at particular points, but then softening it and spreading it out into what's coming. So as far as blooms in my watercolour go, when you get that thing of watercolour running into another and creating a bit of texture, I quite like that as texture. There we go. So just using your watercolours, remembering, if you have a look at, even at these roses, there's very little white petal space left on those. There's almost no white petal space left on these cosmos, but our eye buys into the illusion of this being a white flower. So I'm just trying not to put them down into this paint here. So this is another way to approach your white flowers and just give them a little bit of presence, even if you're working on white paper. I keep saying this because obviously working on a different colour paper will get you a different kind of result. Working on a painted background will get you another different kind of result. And that's what we're probably going to have a little look at in an upcoming episode. I hope you've enjoyed seeing those not white flowers come to life, and there are some tips and tricks there you'll be able to use obviously with any floral stamps. They don't have to be my stamp sets, but thank you as always for your company. Comments, questions down below. I will of course leave a list of what I've been using in the description below the video, along with the link to last episode's stencil flipping white flowers. Thanks so much for being here, and happy crafting all.